About to leave, already packing. Come with me, I'm not really asking. We'll get away to a place where we don't know. About to see the world in action, what we can be, life with no distractions. We'll get away, this is what we waited for. Take my hand, we'll make it somehow. We can't miss out. I'm done living life with the lights out. Die with my own doubts. Be free with me. Let's be free with Not looking back, eyes on the freeway, Bonnie and Clyde, a classic cliche. We're on the run, this is what we waited for. Take my hand, we'll make it somehow. We can't miss out. I'm done living life with the lights out. Die with my own doubts. Be free.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our latest GCSE Sociology live revision session. We've taken a half-term break and back refreshed for some more revision over the coming weeks. And I'm joined again by Vicky and Sarah. Good afternoon, stroke evening to the two of you.
Hi there.
Hi.
We all good?
Yep, good, thank you.
We've got a packed session ahead. I'll let Vicky lead us off in a second. Just a bit of admin to get us going. If you're new to these sessions, a warm welcome to you. If you're catching us on watching live, and I can see from the ticker down here that there's lots of students joining us live, have a go at the activities by typing your answers into the live chat window. Many more students watch these sessions on catch-up or replay, and if that's you, welcome too. Don't get the chance to use a live chat, but of course you can pause the video at some stage if you wish to give yourself a bit more time and compare your answers with the activities that are guided that we have guided to us by Vicky and Sarah. The link is tutortu.net/live to go back through this session and all previous GCSE Sociology sessions. Vicky, over to you. Should we get going?
Yep, so welcome to our fifth live stream. So last term we were focusing on crime and deviance. So if you've missed those, then please pop back and have a look at those. But this term we are moving on to units you covered in year 10. So obviously it's going to be really handy for mock exams that are coming up. So we're going to start off with families for a couple of weeks. Then we've got a couple of weeks on education. And then we're going to get some research methods in there as well. So hopefully they'll be really useful for you in those upcoming mocks over the next few weeks. So today we are focusing on family, form and functions and looking at the perspectives of these. So we're going to kick off with a nice easy round of altered vowels. All of these are family forms. So if you haven't joined us before, you need to, there'll be a a phrase that comes up on the board. The vowels have been completely altered. You just need to guess what it is and pop that in the chat window for us. And like I said, they are all different types of family. Okay, can we have the first one up, please, Jim? Excellent. Okay, so our first type of family, if you can pop this into the chat window, give you a couple of moments to have a guess at what you think this type of family form might be. Excellent. Well done, Louisa. Good work. It is the nuclear family. I'm going to talk to you about these a bit later in the session, but 2 generations, male and female parents and their children. And hopefully we will know that in the past it has been presented as the best and the most normal type of family in the UK. But obviously there are some real issues around that sort of that representation, which we'll discuss a bit later. Okay, Jim, can we have the next one up, please? Excellent. So what do we think this one is? So again, I'll give you a few moments to get your guess down into the chat window. Okay. Just a couple more seconds we're going to give you. Okay, this one seems to have stumped us slightly. It's a single-sex family, also known as a same-sex family. So same-sex couple and their children. Again, we'll talk about them a bit later on in this session. Okay, next one up, please, Jim. Okay, I think they're actually probably getting a little bit more difficult. So this one here, what do we think this might be? Remember, these are all types of family. Okay, what do we think? Hopefully the second word is fairly similar, also fairly easy. Okay, I'm just going to give you a couple more moments to get those guesses into the chat. Okay, so can we have the answer on the screen, please? It is a lone parent family. So one parent, either mum or dad, with their dependent children. And it normally follows divorce, death, or simply a woman choosing to have children alone. And again, we'll talk about the increase of lone parent families a bit later as well. And we've got 2 more to do. This one I think is really tricky. What do we think this one might be? So it is known by 2 different words. Okay, slightly more difficult one in brackets. Hopefully the first one outside of the brackets might be a little bit easier. Okay, what do we think? So the first word, hopefully, is slightly easier. Well done, Louisa. So, and a boy. It is a blended, or also known as a reconstituted family. So these are step families with one or both parents having children from previous relationships. Excellent. Right, our last one is coming up. What do we think this might be? Again, I think this is quite tricky. The altered vowels are pretty confusing. Sort of plays, obviously, sort of messes with your head a little bit when you're trying to work on them. Well done again, Louisa. You have got in first. It is extended. So where 3 or more generations live together, or they live close by. So not necessarily under one roof. So you've got your children, your parents, and your grandparents. So I'm going to hand over to Sarah now, who is just going to talk to us very briefly about what we're going to cover today.
Thanks, Vicky. That was a lovely warm-up. Okay, what are we doing in this session today? We're going to be focusing on 4 key aspects of family functions and forms. Firstly, we'll be looking at the consensus theories. So these notions of primary socialisation and SOAP, which you'll be familiar with, stabilisation of adult personalities. We'll be looking at the conflict theories, how families are seen by Marxists to support capitalism and the patriarchy. And then we'll look at family forms in the UK and globally. And then we'll look at theories on family diversity. So we are going to kick off with Vicky taking us through the functionalist perspective.
Thank you very much. So hopefully we know that the functionalist perspective is a consensus theory. So that basically means that functionalists believe that the institution of the family is really good for society. And hopefully we will all remember that functionalists have quite a traditional and quite a conservative view of society, including the family. So we're going to start off by looking at G.P. Murdoch. And he studied families around the globe. And he talks about families having 4 universal functions, which he believed that he could observe in all families that he looked at, wherever he was. So firstly, he talked about families having emotional support. So he talked about this emotional support being, or emotional stability, being given through sex within a marriage, which he claimed would stabilise those couples and it would prevent adultery. And therefore, by stabilising couples, you are stabilising society. Okay, he believed that was one really important role of the family. Secondly, he believed that families gave economic support through financial stability. So he again talked about providing resources in terms of food and shelter. Thirdly, he talked about that reproductive role that families have. So reproducing, ensuring there is a supply of new members of society. And then lastly, he talked about education. So by stabilising children into society's norms and values, he said that therefore would mean that they would function as proper good members of society. Now, he argued that the nuclear family was the best family unit to provide these 4 universal functions that he believed were really, really, really important. Jim, can we have the next slide up, please? So another sociologist that hopefully you will have come across, Talcott Parsons, believes, he agrees with GP Murdoch. Again, the nuclear family provides really important functions. Okay, like Sarah just said, the SOAP, so stabilisation of adult personalities. He claimed that the nuclear family was the best form of family for quite a few different reasons. He believed that the family provided 2 functions, and he called them irreducible functions. So firstly, primary socialisation, which would teach children the values and norms of society so they would become those decent citizens. Okay, and he would then argue that perhaps secondary socialisation was less important as a result. Secondly, that emotional stability. He said that giving support and security needed to cope with wider society or in wider society. And he talked about the family being like coming home, or the family unit being like a warm bath, claiming that the family helped to relieve stress and tension from work and that provided contentment through emotional stability. He also argued that it worked best if mum stayed at home. So again, quite a traditional view. The father going out working, mum staying at home, getting that home life, looking after the children, getting those domestic chores done, making sure that house was nice and relaxing when the man returned after a long day at work. So really interesting perspective, obviously a very traditional perspective and completely different than the perspective that Sarah is about to talk to you about. So I'm going to hand back over to Sarah. Sorry.
Thanks, Vicky. So from consensus, that brilliant overview of consensus theory there from Vicky, we're moving into the feminist perspective. So feminists, although they agree with functionalists that the family does provide this socialisation, they don't see it as such a positive thing. So feminists believe that the family creates this gender role socialisation where from a very young age we are socialised into those typically male or female roles. So Anne Oakley did a lot of work on this, and she noticed in her studies, in her research, that children are socialised from a very early age into their future gender roles. One of the key terms you can use for this that's really helpful when you're writing your answers is canalization. So this idea that different, boys and girls are put down these different paths and they're pushed into these paths, by giving them toys, by socialization in the media, and within the family itself. So, for example, we might see girls being given nurturing toys, including dolls, maybe items to do with housework, those mini ironing boards, which up until quite recently always had girls on the packaging, until that's been challenged. And then what this brings in is this idea that women are then, as they get older and they've been, canalized into these gender roles, they end up picking up the dual burden, the paid work and the unpaid labour, because women are ending up doing more of the housework and then the childcare on top of that paid work. So they've got this dual burden, which Anne Oakley looked at and then has been developed by other sociologists. So if we can have the next slide, please, Jim. Delphi and Leonard picked up on Anne Oakley's idea of a dual burden, and they agreed that this really reinforces these patriarchal structures of society, these patriarchal norms, which, of course, the gender role socialisation is playing into. And what Delphi and Leonard noticed is that the family unit actually promotes, and socialises people into this set of labour relations. And by labour relations, we mean the way that work is divided up, who does what. And feminists claim that this benefits men and it reinforces the patriarchy. So women taking on most household tasks, even when both people in the relationship are working. So women taking on this dual burden and men actually benefiting from the family unit. So we're picking up on those, the aspects that Vicky talked about just now, that emotional benefit from the family, that stabilization of adult personalities, that warm bath. But feminists are picking up on that and saying, actually, that doesn't benefit the whole family. That benefits the men in the family, and men are getting a better deal from the family and far more benefits than women are, according to feminists. And I'm going to hand back to Vicky to complement that conflict theory with another conflict theory, Marxism.
Excellent. Thank you very much. So our last conflict theory is Marxism that we're going to have a look at today. So we're going to have a look at the work of Eli Zaretsky, a famous Marxist, and he argued that families are organised to benefit capitalism, and the structure and activities of the family keep that capitalism idea going. So he talked about the family reproducing and nurturing those future workers that capitalism needs. He then talked about the family buying those products that capitalism produces. So that idea of consumerism. So they make the stuff, but they're also buying the products as well. And one of the reasons for that is linked to advertising, because advertising tells families that we need the latest products to make their lives better, which fuels that idea of consumerism. And he used the term the cult of private life that you might have come across, where he argued that people bury themselves in family life and they close their eyes to the injustices of capitalism, which is easier to do so when you're surrounded by stuff that makes your sort of family life maybe a bit easier. He says the family also provides that emotional support for workers, so they are more able to cope with boring, unfulfilling tasks. And, if they've got stress and unhappiness at work, they come home to a family, that's going to make it much easier. You could also argue as well that workers are far less likely to challenge the sort of the order at work if they have a family to support. So there's all sorts of things he talked about there, like, again, family being, family not being perhaps the positive institution that the functionalists that I talked about earlier would argue. So I'm going to hand back over to Sarah. Sarah has a conveyor belt quiz that asks you questions about some of the things that we have covered.
Okay, so this quiz is a really good test of the different perspectives on family that we've just looked at. So you're going to have 1 minute, and while the music plays, you're going to see different questions come along the conveyor belt. So please pop your answers as you see the questions, pop your answers in the chat, have a go, and you've got 6 questions, and then we will have a look at the answers afterwards. So we're ready to go. Two benefits from Talcott Parsons. What does the family provide? And then what was Talcott Parsons' theory called? What's the name of that theory that provides some of these benefits to the family? See some answers coming in. Well done. Excellent. And then what are those 4 functions of the family according to George Peter Murdoch? You can abbreviate those if it's easier. You're having to type quickly. And then what is the concept, the sociological concept that Anne Oakley gave us, where women are doing the paid work and the unpaid work? And how did Zaretsky say that families serve capitalism? What do they do to benefit capitalism? Some great answers coming through. Fantastic to see those sociological concepts. What term do we have that describes this obsession with buying things? And we've seen some fantastic answers coming through. I've seen lots and lots of correct answers. And this is our opportunity to have a look at what were the right answers to those 6 questions. So our 2 benefits that Talcott Parsons says the family provides. What have we got coming out the box there? Primary socialisation. Well done to those of you who had that in the chat. And this SOAP, stabilisation of adult relationships. Well done to those of you who got that right. And let's have a look at the next one. What was Talcott-Parsons' theory called? We had some brilliant dual coding there with a brilliant picture that has stuck that in my mind. The warm bath theory, that picture of the dog and the bath, hopefully has helped you remember it. And you'll be thinking of that dog in the exam. 4 functions of the family. This was a real big one to get in there, in the space of a minute with the other questions. So we've got economic, education, reproduction, and sexual. And if you got some or all of those, well done. I saw lots and lots of correct ones in the chat. And what's that term that Anne Oakley gave us where women are doing the paid and the unpaid work, taking on a disproportionate share of the family responsibilities? That really powerful term to use in your exam answers, the dual burden. And on to the next question. How did Zaretsky tell us that families serve capitalism? What do families do to benefit capitalism and keep it going? So the family nurtures and reproduces the workers. If you had that, well done. And also this family as a unit of consumption. So they're buying the products to keep capitalism going. Well done if you got that right. And what is the term that describes, so we're looking for a Marxist term here. What is the term that describes the obsession with buying things? Did you get it? It's consumerism. And using those key terms is really important to elevate the language that we use when we're faced with those exam papers. Okay, I'm handing back over to Vicky now, and we're going to have a look at family forms.
Excellent. So we're going to have a quick sort of whistle-stop tour of family forms across the UK. We've kind of already mentioned some of these, and then we're going to have a quick look at how they vary across the globe. So our first one is nuclear family. So we talked about them already. We referred to the nuclear family in a few of the functionalist theories earlier as well. So with the male and female parents and their children. For a really long time, this was seen as a preferred family form, seen as normal and embraced by politicians and the media in particular. And sometimes it was referred to as a cereal packet family after being used to sell all manner of products on TV adverts. It is still seen as a preferred family form by many functionalists, obviously, which then underpins that work of Parsons and Murdoch that we've already talked about in this session. So our next one is a single-sex family, or the same-sex family, as it is sometimes known. So it's much more common as a type of family than we used to have. And it consists of one same-sex couple who may be living together, or they might be in a civil partnership, or since 2014, they may actually be married. Okay, so finally got legal changes have enabled that to happen. Same-sex couples have had the right to adopt since 2002, which followed the Adoptions and Children Act. Again, much more common as a family unit now, again, as we become a much more tolerant society. So then we move on to our lone parent family. So one parent, either mum or dad, with their dependent children. Lone parents actually lone parent families actually make up about a quarter of all families in the UK. And 90% of lone parent families are headed by a woman. If we think about those lone parent families, in the past, they would have been mainly formed by the death of a parent, but much more common now is they are formed by divorce or the end of a relationship. And like I mentioned earlier, in some cases, women just choosing to have children on their own without a partner. We've then got our blended and reconstituted families. So we talked about them earlier, so they were known as step families, where one or more of partner have had children from previous relationships. And they actually might go on to have children together. So that's when we kind of get into half sibling territory. This is actually the UK's fastest growing family form. And there are more blended families than nuclear families in the UK these days, which is not really surprising considering about 40% of marriages end in divorce anyway in our country. We're going to talk a bit more about changes in families in next week's session, so we'll talk about divorce then. And then we have our extended family, which consists of those relatives as well as your immediate family. So you might have 3 or more generations living together, or they live close by. It is really common in other countries, particularly places like India, for example. So it's often replicated in these communities within the UK. Jim, can I have the next slide up, please? So really quickly, I just want to talk to you about a couple of family forms that we might find around the globe and how they differ from the UK. So If we think about the term polygamy, it's a term that hopefully you've come across in your sociological work, but this refers to a marriage where one partner is allowed to legally marry several partners at the same time. It is illegal in the UK. If it happens in the UK, it is referred to as bigamy, again, a term that you probably have come across. It is most common for a man to have several wives, and it is found in lots of traditional societies, so particularly across Northern Africa and in the Middle East, but it's also quite common in tribal societies as well. Men need to be pretty wealthy though, because obviously if you are supporting, if you've got lots of wives and offspring, you're going to need to be able to afford to support them. It is also seen as quite unfair often by the women in these societies. It's patriarchal, so unfortunately these women don't often have much choice. But certainly in terms of unfairness, you get issues where the man decides that he wants to bring another bride into the family, and obviously the other wives have got to kind of get on with that, and as they get older, that's perhaps something that they maybe growing a little bit less tolerant of. And at the bottom, we have another term that is a bit less common. You may not have come across it. It's polyandry, which is when a woman has more than one husband. It is far less common as a family form, usually only seen in societies where there is a shortage of men, really interestingly. So a really good example of that is in some areas of Nepal, really remote regions. It is customary for a woman to marry all of the brothers in the family, and they generally have to make sure that they're showing no favouritism and that each husband is treated the same. So it's a really interesting, but obviously very unusual family form, and certainly one that we probably, well, I don't think we'd find in the UK. So I'm going to hand over to Sarah to talk to you a little bit more about family diversity.
Thanks, Vicky. So the Rappaports give us this really lovely framework to analyse family diversity and how that diversity has changed, kind of moving towards the modern day, and how it may continue changing as well. So they've given us these 5 different types of diversity. So we're just going to talk through each of these so you've got a basic understanding of them. So we start off with organisational diversity. And this is something we've already talked about today, really, this organisation of domestic labour, who earns the money. We're moving away from having these kind of male-dominated, male breadwinner families, and we're moving towards more symmetrical families where we have 2 breadwinners, where there are these shared conjugal roles, where the 2 partners in the family mirror each other in the workloads that they take on. So that's organisational. Then we've moved into a diversity of life course. And by life course, we mean at what stage in our lives do we do different things? So if you go back 100 years, it would have been very common to get married much younger, to have children much younger, for women to prioritise getting married and having children rather than thinking about education and careers. And of course, that's changing. And we have a much wider diversity, because it's not simply that, some women are thinking of spending longer in education or having, waiting and having children in their 30s instead of in their 20s, and some women in their 40s and 50s, particularly due to technology. So there are lots of, reasons that underpin why these diversities have been able to emerge. But also with life course, we're seeing women who are choosing, and men who are choosing not to settle down, who are choosing to have that single person household, not to have children, and not feeling defined by a pre-laid out life course that they're expected to have. Now, of course, we're talking about that from a very Western perspective. That's not necessarily the same globally, but it does give us a way to analyse the changes in what we do when throughout our life. And then it's really important to remember that class, social class, has a big impact on family diversity. Often we'll find that when we're reading about the family, or when the family is talked about in the media, that it comes from a very generic middle class perspective. But we have to remember that there is a diversity between how families live, how they work, how they organise their household based on their social class and their economic status. So availability of resources will affect how a family lives. Quality of housing will affect how a family is able to organise themselves, and how the family spends their leisure time. and the nature of their family life will be affected by the funds, the resources, the money that they have available. So social class is a really nice aspect to bring in so that we can evaluate this diversity and not presume that all families are kind of moving in the same direction or that they are all that typical middle class family. We've then got cohort. Now, cohort you can think of as generational. So we're talking about different changes between or as the generations move on. So previous generations, if you go back 2-3 generations, you'll see those bigger families, more siblings, larger extended families. And we've kind of moved into more of a beanpole structure, where that means that families don't have such big extended families. They don't have so many uncles and aunts and grandparents and extended relatives. So that will change the way that families live their life and the way that they organize their families, and that of course outside of the nuclear family, and that will have an impact on how they live. And then finally the rapports give us this cultural aspect. So even within the UK, but of course globally as well, ethnicity and cultural background will play a big part in how our families are organised, how they live. That will affect gender roles. So different cultures will have different aspects of gender roles. And of course, that will affect life course, because different cultures will have different approaches to marriage, to introducing people to each other in order to get married, and having expectations of being married at a certain age. And that will also affect attitudes towards education as well. So that ethnicity has a really big impact on how families live their life. And it's important for us to remember that, because it's more evaluation, so that we're making sure that we're not just giving this one generic version of family diversity. Okay, so you've got your 5 aspects there from the rapports, and Vicky is going to take us into a true or false quiz.
Brilliant. Thank you, Sarah. That was really, really interesting. So we have 5 quick true or false statements for you now. You just need to pop a T or an F into the chat window. So our first one is nuclear families are the most common family form in the UK. So I'm going to give you a few moments just to get your answer in. So is this true? Is it false? Okay, so we've got a couple of answers coming through. We have mentioned this in our talk about different family types. Okay, Jim, can we have the correct answer up, please? So it is false. Previously, nuclear families have been the most common family, but we now have more of other types of family. Okay, Jim, can we have the next one up, please? So lone parents account for 1/4 of all UK families. Is this true or false? What do we think? I'll give you a couple of moments. Again, if you were listening carefully, this is, I talked about this in the last section. Excellent. We've got some good answers coming through. Well done. Okay, so if we can have the correct answer on the screen, please, Jim. It is true. So these lone parent families do now account for 1/4 of all UK families. Okay, next question or next statement up on the screen. So same-sex couples do not have the same rights in terms of adoption as other family forms. What do we think? Is this true or false? So same-sex couples do not have the same rights in terms of adoption as other family forms. Okay, we've got a couple of answers coming through as true. Is there anybody who disputes that statement? Okay, so at the moment we've got a bit of consensus that we think it's true. Okay, let's have this on the screen, please, Jim. Actually, it is false. So since 2002, in the Adoption and Children's Act, following the Adoption and Children's Act, same-sex couples do have the same rights in terms of adoption as other family forms. I think that was quite a tricky one. Okay, our 4th one, please. There are more reconstituted families in the UK than nuclear families. I had to be really careful a minute ago because I did nearly give you the answer to this question when I was answering one of the others. Well done. Excellent answers coming through. It is true. Okay, with the increase in divorce rates, we've got more lone parent families going up. We also have more reconstituted families, and they have recently overtaken nuclear families in terms of number, which is quite surprising. Because I guess most of us again would think that nuclear families were the norm, but actually not the case anymore. Last statement, then, please, Jim. Extended families all have to live under the same roof. What do we think? Do we think that extended families all have to live under the same roof to be an extended family? True or false? Okay, let's have the answer up on the screen. It is false. They just need, they can be living under the same roof, but they just need to be living closer by to be considered extended family, like, grandma down the road, auntie such and just round the corner, etc. Excellent. So I'm going to hand over to Sarah to do a quick bit of exam practice with you, and then after that we have got one quick final quiz activity for you.
Thanks, Vicky. Okay, we're going to have a look at one of those GCSE paper 3 markers. And these are questions that you really need to be focused on exactly how to write them so that you can get them done in the time frame, and you've got the timing for the rest of your questions in the paper. So this one we're going to look at is identify and describe a criticism. And this really emphasises the importance of revising all of your criticisms and evaluations as well as the core content. So it's a criticism that Marxists make about families. So I'm just going to give you a minute to jot a couple of things in the chat if you've got some ideas of how you would answer that question. And if we have a look at the next slide, thank you, Jim. We might like to think about, how do families perpetuate the class system? So what kind of, theories might you use about these advantages that are handed down from one generation to another? So we're going to thinking about, how does the family act as a vehicle for that? But also you can think about that Zaretsky and that unit of consumption that we talked about today. So how are families actually exploited by capitalism? And of course, that's a criticism that Marxists would have because they're coming in from that conflict perspective. Oh, and also families reproducing this like army of labour. So why might Marxists criticise that and see that as something that they have conflict with? So we've got some really good suggestions coming through in the chat. Louisa, that's brilliant. Zaretsky arguing that the family is a unit of consumption and that it's therefore kind of exploited and manipulated by capitalist values. Fantastic. That idea of pester power that we've got in the chat there, that's a really good concept to link in here. So this notion that through kind of marketing and manipulation, we've got this pester power, this idea of keeping up with the Joneses. And therefore, we're becoming, more and more of a unit of consumption, and we're compelled to keep buying these material things. So let's have a look at the next slide. We've got some exam gold, some real tips here to make sure that you can hit 3 out of 3 on these 3-mark questions. So as we've said in our previous live sessions, and this is really important to keep reminding yourself, the examiner wants to see one reason developed. They want to see one reason chosen and developed fully, not 3 reasons, not 2 reasons, just one, because you will only be credited for that one reason. But the development is what gets you up to 3 out of 3. They want to see through your answer that you really get the Marxist viewpoint. They want to see that you have focused on either class inequality or that you focused on this mindset, this ideology of capitalism. So you pick one reason. For example, you might pick social inequality as being passed down from one generation to the next, and social privilege, private property and things being passed down from one generation to the next. And you might use those key terms like the bourgeoisie are able to hand their wealth down to the family members. But they're also passing down these kind of advantages, educational advantages, financial advantages, social advantages, who they know and the communities that, people they can introduce you to. And what that does is it creates this social reproduction and it recreates social class generation after generation, as we see in our society. So choose the answer, develop it so you've got 2 more pieces of information once you've made your point. Keep it sociological, bring those key terms and that language in there so that you're really getting across and showing the examiner that you understand the Marxist viewpoint. Okay, and to test your knowledge with one more final activity, we're going to have a look at a connection board with Vicky.
Thank you very much. So if you have seen a connection board before, we basically have 12 statements on the screen, and we have they need to be grouped into 3 groups of 4. Okay, and they're all linked to, they have something in common, and they are to do with those perspectives that we were looking at earlier. So I'm going to help you out a little bit here. I'm going to want you to start off by looking for those groups of phrases that you think are connected to functionalism. So the ones that are about the functionalist view of the family. There are 4 of them. If you can quickly note them down into the into our chat window. So if I go across the top, we've got the dual burden, the power of advertising, the nuclear family, reinforces patriarchy. We've got primary socialization, producing the next workers. Women still do the biggest share of household chores and childcare. Gender roles, reinforced from an early age. Families help people cope with boring and unfulfilling roles. Families as consumers, the warm bath theory, and we have emotional stability. Okay, so let's have a look. Obviously, if you are watching this on a playback, this probably would be a really good time to pause and give yourself a little bit more time. If you're live with us, unfortunately, you've just got to suck it up and keep going for a few more moments. Some really good ideas coming through here. So we were looking for the functionalist viewpoint, but we've got Yanadi has charged off ahead and is picking out our feminist views. So we'll have a look at those in a minute. Okay, so the functionalist views, let's have those on the screen, please, Jim. Perfect. So that idea of primary socialization, the nuclear family, the warm bath theory, and emotional stability. Okay, they are all functionalist views of the family. So what I would like you, while we have some of you in the chat window who have looked up the feminist viewpoints, well done, I would like us next to have a look at the Marxist viewpoints. What that will then do is it will leave 4 left over, and we can double check and see those of you that have guessed the feminist to see whether you are correct. So let's have a look at the Marxist view of the family. So think about some of the things that Zaretsky had to say about the point of the function of the family. Okay, so again, if you are watching on demand, you can obviously pause it, give yourself a little bit more time. Good, so we've got some good answers coming through. We've got the idea of advertising family as consumers. We've got family helping cope with boring, unfulfilling lives. And we have the next workers coming up. So, Jim, can we have those on the screen to check that they are correct? So, well done. So, between the two of you, Minecraft and Louisa, you got all of those correct. Excellent work. Which leaves us with the feminist view of the family. So, Jim, can you just highlight this for us, please? So, we have the dual burden. We've got the reinforcing of patriarchy. We've got the gender roles being reinforced from an early age. And women still doing the biggest share of household household chores and childcare, which I think, Louise, you got all of those. Minecraft, you got those as well. Excellent work. Really, really good work. And brilliant engagement from those of you in the live chat tonight. Some really, really good things there. So our last slide on the screen just shows you some of the resources that we've got available to you on Teach4U. We've got some revision cards. We've got an excellent new family student workbook. And there's all sorts of other stuff that you can find on our website. You can go to tutor2u.net, or you can scan the QR code that is currently on the screen. And that is a really good idea, Minecraft. We are actually in the process of sorting the template out for those connection walls to make sure they are numbered. But thank you very much.
Indeed, there is a new version, I think, ready next week for that. I think somebody else suggested that just before half term.
Yeah.
In fact, there's even a festive version of the connection wall coming out next week.
Oh,
maybe next week we try a couple of our new festive formats. Okay. Many thanks. That was really, really, really useful. I learned a lot just by listening in. In fact, I'm going to chat about what I've covered tonight when I go back to see my wife shortly, whilst I'm doing the ironing at the same time, obviously, and also whilst I'm running a warm bath for my Labrador dog.
Excellent.
And I think I've got 3 theories in there, I think.
Yeah, you have.
That was pretty good.
Thank you very much. Fantastic stuff. Many, many thanks to all the students who've joined us live. Louisa, Minecraft and others who've put some fantastic responses in the live chat there. So well done to you for getting through that challenging session. 35 minutes of very fast-paced revision, but some really useful stuff there as well in terms of the key content and also exam technique. So hopefully you found it useful. If you did, give us a thumbs up. And if you're watching on catch up and replay, you can still give us a thumbs up on YouTube, because that really helps this session and others like it get suggested by YouTube to students as they're revising for mocks. I guess mocks and assessments coming up this half term for quite a few students. If that's you, all the best. So we are back again this time next week. It's the same time on a Monday, 5:30 for our GCSE Sociology sessions. So spread the word, and maybe join us if you can for our next session with Vicky and Sarah. What's the topic next week? I've forgotten. It's families again, is it?
Yeah, changing families next week. So we'll look at things like divorce and family size and how that's changing, and we'll look at conjugal roles and all sorts of things there.
Fantastic. Don't forget, you can go to tutor2u.net/live. You can see it there on the screen to go back over this and all the other sessions that Sarah and Vicky and the team have put together in 2021. There are loads of them for GCSE Sociology. Yeah. So well worth dipping into those if you want something a little bit different to use for your revision. But for now, it's time to go. Have a great evening, everyone. Yeah. Huge thanks, as always, to Sarah and to Vicky. Another fantastic session. We'll see you soon. So see you later.
Well Bye. Done.